They thought you were just a black student, easy to bully, mock, and humiliate. They laughed at your skin color, treated you like an outsider, believing you were too weak to fight back. But they didn't know they were messing with the wrong person. Jamal Moreau wasn't just an ordinary student. He was the son of Louis Moreau, a name that the whole city whispered about in fear. A man whose enemies didn't just lose, they disappeared. And now, the bullies were about to learn a lesson they would never forget. Westwood High was always noisy every morning. The laughter, the slamming lockers, the shoes clattering on the tile floor. But today, something was different. A new student had just transferred. Jamal Moreau walked through the main door with a calm demeanor, hands in his jacket pockets, his eyes quietly scanning everything around him. He wasn't dressed overly flashy, no designer clothes or expensive accessories. He wasn't trying to draw anyone's attention, but if someone really paid attention, they'd notice something. He wasn't like the other students. Jamal didn't walk. He glided, each step slow, purposeful, as if he knew exactly where he was and who was watching him. He didn't glance nervously around like other new students. He didn't seem awkward or out of place. Instead, he carried an unusual calmness, a sense of absolute control. Some students glanced at him before turning away. Others whispered to each other, curious about this tall, unfamiliar black kid. But no one knew who he really was. His father, Louis Moreau, was no ordinary man. He was a legend, a name spoken in the dark, in conversations cut short by fear. A man who, when he entered a room, even the toughest men had to fall silent. But at Westwood, no one knew that. Not yet. Jamal walked down the crowded hallway of Westwood, feeling the eyes glide over him, the judgmental glances, the whispers that seemed harmless but were full of hidden meaning. He didn't need to look back to know what they were saying. He was too familiar with this. The comments that seemed like just jokes but were actually full of discrimination. Wow, he looks just like one of those guys from a crime movie. I wonder if our school has a diversity policy. Be careful, these guys, if they get pissed, it's over. Jamal didn't react. He'd heard these things his whole life. Westwood wasn't any different. It was a wealthy school, where most of the students came from powerful families, where everything was decided by connections and unspoken favoritism. And for people like Ryan Carter, the world was simple. There were those on top and those beneath. Ryan Carter, the football team captain, the son of a wealthy businessman who was often seen at the mayor's fundraising events. He was the type of person who had never known the meaning of failure or rejection. Everything in his life came easily, from taking the lead in the football team to being favored by teachers to having control over those weaker than him. Ryan didn't need to be the best. He just needed to be seen as the best. He didn't need to be the strongest. He just needed others to believe he was the strongest. For him, dominance was a game, and anyone who didn't bow down would have to pay. And Jamal, a black student who had just transferred silent with no close friends, no backing, the perfect target. Ryan started with his usual tricks. He never struck immediately. He liked to test, to probe the prey, to find weaknesses before making his final move. It all started with those shoulder nudges in the hallway. Seemingly accidental, but never really accidental. A light touch just enough to push Jamal off his step, causing the books in his hands to go askew. The chuckling from Ryan's friends echoed as Jamal passed by. Half joking, half serious comments, loud enough for him to hear. He's probably here for the scholarship. Maybe the school needs a few more diversity stats. Hope he's not carrying a knife. These guys are famous for their violence. These tricks weren't new. Jamal had seen people like Ryan hundreds of times. People like him didn't want to win. They just wanted to see others surrender. But Jamal wasn't that kind of person. He didn't bow his head. He didn't smile awkwardly. He didn't react. He just kept walking, silent as if nothing had happened. It was that indifference that irritated Ryan. He wasn't used to being ignored. The people he'd bullied always reacted the same way. Either they trembled in fear or they got angry. Both gave him satisfaction. But Jamal? He didn't do anything. He just kept walking as if Ryan had never existed. And that drove him mad. Ryan Carter had never let anyone make him feel invisible, and he wasn't going to let it happen now. If Jamal thought he could escape Ryan's attention, he was wrong. Jamal's indifference didn't discourage Ryan. It only made him more determined. He was used to controlling people with his presence. He didn't need to beat or shout to make someone tremble with fear. A look, a smile full of implication, a well-timed word whispered into someone's ear, and he'd get the reaction he wanted. But Jamal was different. Jamal didn't respond, nor did he bow his head. He just kept walking, maintaining that annoying calmness. It wasn't weakness or fear. It was a quiet confidence, as if he understood better than anyone else how this game worked. And that alone frustrated Ryan more than anything. He began testing Jamal's limits. The hallways of Westwood were always crowded in the morning, a perfect space for shoulder bumps disguised as accidental contact. Ryan didn't hesitate to let his shoulder crash into Jamal's as they passed by each other. He expected a furious glance, a retort, some sign that he had struck a nerve. But Jamal just kept walking as if Ryan didn't exist. Ryan gritted his teeth. His friends, those who always supported and cheered on any power play he orchestrated, began to sense the tension. He's disrespecting you, bro. Maybe he thinks he's better than us. He probably doesn't get how things work around here. Ryan didn't need their reminders. He knew exactly what was happening, and he wouldn't let it continue. One day, as Jamal was opening his locker, Ryan walked up to him. This time, he wasn't planning on shoving or bumping into him. He wanted to look Jamal straight in the eye, to see a flicker of hesitation, any small reaction he could latch onto. "Hey, kid," he said slowly, with loaded meaning. "Bet you feel pretty out of place here, huh? This isn't your turf." His friends laughed loudly. A few other students glanced over but quickly looked away. Jamal closed his locker. Not in a rush, not angry. He turned to face Ryan, his eyes locked onto his. Just for a second. The look was empty, cold, but not fearful. It was the gaze of someone who had become so accustomed to confrontations like this that they had grown boring. Ryan felt a slight shiver down his spine. It passed quickly, but it was real. Jamal didn't say a word. He simply turned and walked away, leaving Ryan standing there, his smile fading awkwardly. Had he won? He had humiliated Jamal in front of everyone, asserting his power in this school. But why? Why did he feel like he had lost something? This feeling was strange, and Ryan hated it. He clenched his fists. If Jamal thought he could ignore him forever, he was terribly mistaken. Jamal Moreau could stay silent for as long as he liked. But soon enough, Ryan would make him speak. Ryan hated the feeling of powerlessness. He had never gotten used to being ignored, and he couldn't stand it when someone dared stand before him without showing any fear or weakness. In the past, whenever he bullied someone, he always got a reaction, a plea, a bowed head in humiliation, or at least a burst of uncontrolled anger that gave him a reason to push things further. But Jamal didn't. He just stood there, calm, as if all Ryan's provocations meant nothing. This couldn't continue. That lunch, as soon as he entered the cafeteria, Ryan quickly spotted Jamal sitting in a corner, alone as always, having lunch in complete silence. Jamal still looked the same, with no signs of dissatisfaction or hesitation, no indication that he was under pressure from Ryan's actions. and that made Ryan furious. He couldn't let this continue. If others thought Jamal could just ignore him without paying a price, he would lose the power he had always enjoyed, the ability to control the weaker ones at will. It wasn't just about Jamal anymore. It was about his reputation, about how everyone in the school viewed him. He threw a glance at his friends, a smirk spreading across his face. They all understood the signal. The fun was about to begin. Ryan strode over to Jamal's table, purposely raising his voice louder than usual, just enough to draw the attention of those around them. "Look at this, all alone again? Guess nobody wants to be your friend, huh?" Laughter erupted from his friends. A few students nearby glanced over but quickly turned away, not wanting to get involved. They all knew the rules at Westwood. No interference, never side with the weak, and especially never confront Ryan Carter. Jamal didn't respond. He continued eating, his eyes unshaken, unconcerned by what was happening around him. Ryan gritted his teeth. He waited for a response. Any response, but still nothing. This indifference felt like a silent declaration of war, like an invisible slap that humiliated him more than anything. For a moment, his mind lost control. Without thinking, Ryan grabbed Jamal's food tray, clenched the edges, and flipped it violently. The clatter rang out as the tray slammed into the table, food splattering all over Jamal. Thick sauce splashed onto his shirt, drinks ran down his sleeves, and food pieces scattered on the floor. The cafeteria went silent. Conversation stopped, laughter faded, and all eyes turned to them. Not a word was spoken. Some students blinked at each other, some swallowed nervously, while others quickly lowered their heads, pretending nothing had happened. Ryan stood there, leaning over the table, waiting for a reaction. He wanted to see anger, confusion, loss of control, anything that would prove he had won. But Jamal did nothing. He slowly placed his fork down on the table, calmly looking at his stained clothes. He took a deep breath, very slowly, as though contemplating his next move. Then he looked up. No anger, no fear, no confusion, no signs of being hurt. Just a look, an empty, eerie look that felt like silence itself. A chill ran down Ryan's spine. He couldn't explain why, but in that moment, he felt like he was the one standing on the edge of danger. It felt like he was no longer the hunter, but had unknowingly stepped into the territory of a wild beast he didn't understand. But he quickly shook off that strange feeling. No way. This was just a stubborn, unruly black kid. He couldn't possibly make him feel uneasy. Ryan forced a smug smile, but his voice betrayed him and became tense. "Don't think you're special just because you look different, kid." His friends burst out laughing, while some students lowered their heads, pretending to focus on their meals, but everyone knew what had just happened. Jamal didn't reply. He slowly stood up. No rush, didn't brush off the food from his clothes, didn't show any of the reactions Ryan was expecting. He simply turned around and walked away. No glance back. No sign of having been humiliated in front of the whole school. This silence, it didn't feel like surrender. It felt like a warning. Ryan stood there, watching Jamal's back, his smile slowly turning stiff. He had won, right? He had just humiliated Jamal in front of everyone, reaffirming his power. But why? Why did he feel like he had lost something? A shiver ran through Ryan. This feeling was strange, and he didn't like it. But no matter how hard he tried to reassure himself, one undeniable truth remained clear. He didn't know it, but the game had just begun. The crystal chandelier on the ceiling quietly cast a soft golden light down onto the long wooden table, where the dishes were laid out perfectly, the steak cooked just right, the red wine shimmering in the glass, and fresh vegetables neatly arranged on a pristine white plate. Everything was prepared exactly as it always had been in this house, precise, with not a detail out of place, and no shade missing. But tonight, there was something different about the atmosphere in the dining room. A heavy silence hung in the air. No one spoke. No one broke the long pause between the two Moreau men. Jamal sat there, his knife and fork neatly placed on the edge of the plate, his eyes not looking at the intact steak before him. He was too used to dinners arranged so seriously, with the unspoken rules his father had set long ago. No burying yourself in your phone, no sloppy eating, no meaningless chatter. But tonight he wasn't eating not because of any rule, but because his mind was filled with other thoughts. Jamal wasn't the type of person to be easily influenced. What had happened at school this morning hadn't hurt him, hadn't shaken him or made him angry, but he couldn't deny that it had left a lingering thought in his mind. Not about the bullies, but about how he should handle it. Across from him, Louis Moreau, his father, sat quietly enjoying his dinner. His black hair, peppered with gray, was neatly combed, his perfectly tailored suit without a wrinkle. Though he was at an age when many other men began to step away from power games, Louis still radiated an undeniable authority. In the criminal world, he wasn't just any person. He was a name of weight, a shadow that those who truly held power knew, but no one dared speak of directly. Jamal had lived his entire life under that shadow, not as an imposition, not as control, but as an invisible presence, always there, always reminding him that his family was unlike other families. When Louis Moreau spoke, it wasn't sudden, nor was it surprising. It was as if he had known something for a long time, just waiting for the right moment to say it. "Is something wrong?" Jamal didn't respond immediately. He looked up at his father, his steady brown eyes meeting the sharp, cold gaze of Louis. There was no comfort, no empty, reassuring words like most parents would offer. With Louis, there was no such thing as consolation. He wasn't the type to soothe his son with sweet words. He only required one thing, an answer. Jamal lowered his eyes, his fingers tapping lightly on the edge of his plate, as though weighing whether or not to speak. Then he took a small breath and let out the words he knew would lead to a conversation he couldn't avoid. "Just a few punks thinking they can bully others." A short silence filled the room. Louis Moreau didn't react immediately. He continued cutting a piece of beef from his plate, slowly chewing as if Jamal hadn't spoken at all. But his eyes never left Jamal, watching him like a general evaluating the battlefield before making a decision. When he put down his knife and fork, the soft sound echoed in the quiet space, like a bell signaling a shift in the conversation. "Name?" His voice wasn't loud, no harshness or threat, but it carried a weight that made the room feel even more suffocating. Jamal had expected this question. He had predicted that his father would not accept a half-hearted answer. Louis Moreau wasn't the kind of man who let things happen by chance. Everything in his life was controlled, calculated, handled in the way he wanted. If someone dared challenge his family, they would face the consequences. But Jamal didn't want this to go that way. He shook his head, his gaze firm. "I can handle it myself." Once again, silence stretched between the two of them. Louis looked at his son for a long while, as if assessing whether the statement was genuine confidence or just a declaration trying to mask helplessness. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled. Not a joyful smile, not a proud one. It was more of an acknowledgement, a signal that he had seen something in his son's eyes, something he could respect. He picked up his glass of wine, swirled the deep red liquid, before taking a small sip. When he set the glass down, his voice rang out, slow but heavy with meaning. Good. A simple word, but one with many layers of meaning. He didn't ask again. He didn't pressure Jamal to give a name, but immediately after he said something Jamal knew he would never forget. But remember, son. He tilted his head slightly, his eyes studying Jamal with careful consideration. Sometimes an enemy needs a reminder of their place. Jamal didn't respond immediately. He understood very well what his father meant. He could handle it, but Louis Moreau wasn't talking about handling it in the usual way. He didn't believe in simply enduring or waiting. In his world, power wasn't about avoiding or overlooking. It was about control. Jamal took a deep breath. He wasn't like his father, didn't want to be like him, but there was one thing he couldn't deny. He would never let anyone else dictate his fate. If Ryan Carter thought he could push him down without consequences, he had made a big mistake. Jamal placed his knife and fork down on the table, leaned back in his chair, his gaze growing colder. Perhaps it was time for Ryan Carter to understand exactly who he was dealing with. The name Jamal Moreau whispered through the hallways, spreading like a breeze, but carrying the weight of an impending storm. The whispers no longer stopped when Ryan walked by as they used to. Now they continued, sometimes just fragments of words, sometimes furtive glances full of hesitation. But even though no one spoke it outright, he could feel the shift. Jamal's silence was no longer a sign of weakness, as he had once thought. Now it felt like a warning. He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself, but the unease still crept through his veins. He couldn't stand this. He needed to know for sure. He needed someone to confirm that this was just a stupid misunderstanding. A student walked by, a sophomore Ryan didn't remember the name of, but at this moment it didn't matter. He grabbed the boy by the shoulder, his voice lower than usual, with a hint of urgency. Moreau. Like Louis Moreau? The boy paled, his eyes wide as if asked an unspeakable question. He didn't respond right away, just swallowed hard, as if deciding whether or not to speak. That hesitation said it all. Ryan felt his heart beat faster, each thump echoing in his chest like a hammer striking cold steel. He released the boy's shoulder and took a step back. No words were needed. He knew the answer. Louis Moreau, the name his father even mentioned in important meetings, in a tone Ryan had never heard from him before. Once, he overheard his father talking on the phone late one night. His voice was quieter, more deliberate. No longer the confident man who usually controlled every conversation. He mentioned that name, Louis Moreau, and then fell silent, as if uttering the name alone was enough to change the direction of the conversation. He remembered the feeling then. A strange sensation, because it was the first time he'd seen his father hesitant. And now, he understood why. His mind began to piece together everything he'd heard, everything he'd done over the past week. He hadn't just bullied the wrong person. He had crossed the son of someone the entire underground world had to respect. The laughter, the taunts, the sneers, the overturned lunch tray in the cafeteria. Each image flashed in his mind, each one a blade carving deeper into his awareness of the grave mistake he had made. No way, he muttered, but his voice no longer held the certainty it once did. The more he tried to deny it, the more the pieces fell into place on their own. Jamal Moreau hadn't reacted like everyone else because he didn't need to. He didn't need to shout, didn't need to fight back, didn't need to show anger, because he knew all of that was unnecessary, because he knew that fear would find its way to Ryan. A chill ran down Ryan's spine. It was no longer frustration, no longer the discomfort of being ignored. This was real fear. The students around him continued to walk through the hallways, talking and laughing as usual. But for Ryan, everything felt distant. The card in his coat pocket seemed heavier than before. He remembered the small, embossed words on the back of the card. "Play with fire, you'll get burned." It wasn't a direct threat. It wasn't some crude message like the ones bullies usually get when they pick the wrong fight. It was just a reminder. A simple, clear truth that needed no further explanation. Ryan swallowed hard, his hands slowly clenching into fists. He felt as though the ground beneath him had suddenly become fragile, as if he were walking on thin ice that could break at any moment. The student in front of him still stood there, but his gaze no longer met Ryan's. He stepped back slightly, as if standing near Ryan had already become a risk. For the first time in his life, Ryan Carter felt small. He turned and walked away, not heading to class, not with any specific destination in mind. He just knew he had to get out of there, right now. But no matter how fast he walked, no matter how hard he tried to ignore the truth, there was one thing he couldn't change anymore. The nightmare had begun. And this was only the beginning. Ryan couldn't remember how the rest of the lessons went. The words on the board, the teacher's lectures, the scratch of pens on paper, everything became a meaningless stream of sounds, passing by like a dull movie. He couldn't focus, couldn't think clearly, because in his mind there was only one thought. He had messed with the wrong person. The card in his jacket pocket was still there, a cold reminder that it wasn't over. He could feel it through the fabric, as if it was getting warmer, as if it could burst into flames at any moment. The furtive glances in the hallway no longer carried the admiration or reverence they once did. No one clapped him on the back. No one laughed when he walked by. The atmosphere around him had changed. He was no longer the predator. He was becoming the prey, and that made it hard for him to breathe. The bell rang. Ryan stepped out of the school's main door with a heavy feeling in his chest. He didn't want to linger. His instincts told him that he needed to get out of there as quickly as possible. But as soon as he stepped into the front yard of the school, an uneasy feeling crept into his mind. Something was wrong. Every day, the scene in front of the school was familiar. Students spilling out in groups, cars lined up on the road, parents waiting for their children, the noise of conversation. But today, amidst the crowd, there were two men who stood out in a way that Ryan couldn't ignore. They weren't students, they weren't parents. They were standing a few steps from the school gate, dressed sharply, not overly flashy, but not like ordinary people either. Their shirts were well fitted, trousers neatly pressed, shoes polished. Everything about them was clean, orderly, but there was nothing casual about it. These weren't random men showing up here. They were here for him. Ryan realized it immediately, and that awareness made his breath slow down. He had never met them before, but he knew people like them. People who didn't need to say much, didn't need to do anything special. Just standing there was enough to make others feel uneasy. They weren't bodyguards, and they weren't cops. They were Moreau's people. When Ryan stopped, one of the men looked directly at him and smiled slightly. The smile wasn't friendly, it was just a formality. "Mr. Moreau wants to talk." The voice was deep, unhurried, no threat needed. It was simply a statement, as though whether Ryan agreed or not didn't matter. Ryan felt cold sweat on his back. He could run, he could scream, cause a scene right in the middle of the schoolyard. Do anything to attract the attention of teachers or security. But he didn't do anything, because deep down he knew it would be useless. This wasn't an invitation. This was an order. Ryan swallowed hard, his throat dry. The familiar feeling of control, of power, of invulnerability he once had, now was just an empty shell. He was no longer the one giving orders. He was the one receiving them. He couldn't remember how he followed the two men. Everything seemed to happen in a fog. The crowd of students kept talking, cars still moved, teachers still walked out of the building, but everything seemed distant. Ryan was stepping into a world he didn't understand. A world he should never have entered. They led him to the parking lot behind the school, where usually only teachers and staff parked. There weren't many people around, a perfect place for private conversations. And there, next to a shiny black car, someone was waiting for him. No need for introductions, no need for names. Ryan knew exactly who it was. Jamal Moreau was leaning against the car, hands in his coat pockets, his gaze calm as though this was just an ordinary meeting. No sign of anger, no sign of aggression or desire for revenge. But that was what was most frightening. Because someone who is about to take revenge will lose control. But someone who has complete control doesn't need to do anything. Ryan stopped, not daring to take another step. His fingers involuntarily clenched, but he no longer felt the strength in them. He was no longer the one in charge of the story. Jamal slowly looked up, his sharp eyes locking onto Ryan's, and in that moment, Ryan realized something that made his blood run cold. Jamal had never been the prey. He had just been waiting for the right moment to become the true predator. Ryan Carter had been through many tough situations before. Brawls after football games, confrontations with teachers when caught cheating, even troubles of his own making just to test his limits. But he had never felt as cornered as he did now. He stood there, his back stiff, eyes wide open, staring at Jamal, but he couldn't speak. The two men behind him remained motionless. No orders given, no pressure applied, but their presence felt like two invisible walls, limiting any chance of escape or resistance. In front of him, Jamal remained calm, his deep eyes seeming to look straight through his mind. There was no anger, no hatred, no sign of someone seeking revenge. There was only one thing: absolute control. "Do you think I'm weak?" Jamal asked gently, his voice low and slow, each word echoing in Ryan's mind. Ryan didn't answer. Not because he didn't want to, but because he didn't dare. Any answer now would be a mistake. He couldn't say yes because he knew that would be the dumbest thing he could ever say. But he also couldn't say no, because that would be admitting his own weakness. Jamal stared at him for a moment, as if weighing his response, then took a step forward. Not fast, not slow, but the space between them immediately became suffocating. Ryan didn't step back, but he could feel his body tense. Then Jamal leaned in, getting so close that Ryan could feel his breath brush his ear as he whispered, "I don't need to touch you, but if I wanted to, your life would change forever." Ryan's back was soaked with sweat. That wasn't an ordinary threat. It wasn't like the empty words he'd heard from little punks trying to act tough, nor like the warnings he'd received from his teachers or coaches. It was the truth, because when Jamal spoke those words, Ryan believed every single one of them. He could feel the certainty in Jamal's voice, a cold, unshakable certainty. It didn't need proof, it didn't need explanation, because it wasn't an empty threat, it was a reality Ryan had to face. If Jamal wanted, he could do something right now. No beating, no shouting, no drawing attention. One phone call, one word to the right person, and Ryan Carter would never be the same again. Not in a simple way like being expelled or kicked off the football team, but in a much deeper, permanent, irreparable way. Ryan could feel his heart pounding in his chest, but he couldn't control it. Jamal slowly stepped back, his eyes unchanged. He didn't need to emphasize it further because the message was already crystal clear. Ryan had lost. There was nothing he could do but stand there and realize it. That feeling. It was like being stripped bare, as if every illusion of power, fame, and control he once had was ripped away in mere minutes. All that he had done, all that he had believed, it meant nothing in front of the person standing before him. Jamal didn't need to beat him. He didn't need to push him. He didn't need to humiliate him. He only needed Ryan to understand that he no longer controlled his own fate. Ryan didn't know how long he had stood there, but when Jamal finally turned away, the relief never came. Because he knew it wasn't over. It had just begun. Ryan stood there, his feet seemingly glued to the cold concrete of the parking lot, his hands instinctively clenched at his sides, but with no strength left. His shirt was soaked with sweat, even though the afternoon wasn't hot. Jamal had turned and walked away, but the pressure still weighed heavily on his chest. The presence of the boy lingered, as if Ryan were still trapped in an invisible grip with no way to escape. The two strange men stood in the same spot, silent, not laughing, not saying a word, not doing anything to threaten him. But it was precisely their inaction that was the scariest. They didn't need to touch him, because everything had already been decided. He felt the world he once trusted, the world where he thought he had power, reputation, and could control everything at will, was crumbling piece by piece. Jamal didn't just prove that Ryan couldn't control him. He proved that Ryan never truly had control over anything. He didn't remember how he left the parking lot. His feet moved aimlessly, each breath heavy, his mind completely blank. He just wanted to leave, just wanted to go home, just wanted to find somewhere he could feel safer. But was there anywhere truly safe? As he walked into the student parking lot where his black Mustang was parked, he pulled out his phone by habit. He wasn't sure what he was going to do. Call someone, text his father, try to make sense of everything that had just happened. But when he turned the screen on, a new message awaited, from an unknown number. His eyes quickly skimmed the words on the screen, and as those words burned into his mind, his heart seemed to stop. Tell your dad to watch out for his work. Accidents can happen. Ryan felt his heart drop into his stomach. No, this couldn't be real. He read the message again, hoping he'd misread it, that it was just a cruel joke from someone. But the words on the screen didn't change. It was simple, short, not threatening, not loud, but it carried a weight he had never felt before. He stared at the screen, his fingers frozen, unable to press any key. For a moment, he told himself it could just be a prank. But then he realized Jamal didn't need to joke around. Jamal didn't need to send empty threats. Because if he wanted to, this message wasn't a warning. It was a truth waiting to happen. Ryan felt his body go cold. He had never imagined that the petty school bullying could lead to something like this. He had always thought he was in control, that he could humiliate anyone without consequences, that no one could stand against him. But now he realized he hadn't just picked the wrong person. He had stumbled into a world he didn't belong to. Jamal didn't need to lift a finger. He didn't need to hit him. Didn't need to humiliate him in front of the whole school. He just needed to show him a fraction of what he could do. And that was enough to swallow Ryan whole in fear. His hand shook as he tried to stuff the phone into his pocket. He wanted to forget the message, pretend it never existed, but no matter how hard he tried, those words still echoed in his mind, drilling into his brain like a sharp knife. Tell your dad to watch out. Accidents can happen. He had never thought about his father being in danger. Ryan wasn't someone easily frightened. He had grown up in a family where power was wielded as a weapon. His father was a big businessman with ties to powerful people, sitting at the same table as the mayor and those who could decide the fate of a whole neighborhood with just a phone call. But no matter how powerful his father was, he wasn't Louis Moreau. And now Ryan wasn't sure if his father's connections were strong enough to protect him. What should he do? Pretend nothing happened? Pretend he was still the one in control, that everything would be fine? Or should he tell his father? But if he told him, he would have to admit everything. Admit that he had made a terrible mistake. Admit that he had pushed his family into danger. Admit that he had lost. Ryan stood still in front of the car, his breath heavy, his heart pounding so hard he could feel each beat in his throat. His hand slowly unlocked the car, but he didn't get in right away. He just stood there, his mind empty. For the first time in his life, he felt helpless, no way out. No one to call for help, no way to regain control. Because this time, he wasn't the one making the rules. This time, he was just a pawn, already checkmated. Ryan Carter was no longer himself. He used to be the center of attention, a dominant figure in the school hallways, the leader of the pack, someone who never bowed to anyone. But now, he was just a shadow. No one knew exactly what had changed. He still showed up at school every day, still wore his football jacket, still walked through the familiar hallways. But something was different now. He didn't smile. He didn't talk much. He didn't look for someone to pick on. The students who used to follow him, the old friends, the ones who cheered him on when he pushed someone into a corner, laughing in delight when he humiliated someone in front of everyone, now started keeping their distance. No one said anything, but everyone could feel it. Ryan Carter had changed, and Jamal Moreau didn't have to do a thing. For the first time, Ryan realized that real fear didn't come from punches or threats. It came from silence. Jamal's silence was what haunted him the most. No public revenge, no loud confrontations, no rumors of a retaliation plan. Just absolute silence. And it was this silence that drove him crazy. Ryan had hoped that if Jamal planned on getting revenge, he would do it right away. A punch, a fight, a direct threat, anything, as long as it was visible. But Jamal didn't need to do any of that, because fear found Ryan all on its own, without any intervention. For the first time, Ryan knew what it felt like to lose control. He started to avoid. If he saw Jamal in the hallway, he would turn the other way. If Jamal entered the cafeteria, he would grab food quickly and leave. If Jamal appeared in class, he would remain silent throughout the lesson, no longer the one to mock someone as he once did. No one spoke about it. No one directly said that Ryan was afraid of Jamal, but everyone saw it in his every action. In the early days, he tried to convince himself that it was just a temporary feeling. But the more time passed, the worse it got, the nightmare. It began creeping into his life in ways he couldn't control. His dreams became disturbed. He saw himself standing in a dark room with no one around, only whispers echoing in the darkness. No threats, no shouting, just a soft, powerful voice whispering in his ear like a snake curling around his neck. "Do you think I'm weak?" Ryan jolted awake in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat. Every time his phone buzzed, his heart raced, as if another message would appear. A message that didn't say much, just a reminder that he was being watched. But nothing came. Jamal didn't text, didn't seek him out, didn't look at him for more than a second. Jamal didn't need to do anything. Fear now lived inside Ryan. He didn't need anyone to threaten him anymore. His own mind had become the one punishing him. The old loyalists were gone. His friends noticed the change and quickly distanced themselves from him. No one wanted to be near someone who had lost their power. the ones who used to follow him, laugh with him, cheer for him. Now they whispered behind his back, as if he were a disease they didn't want to catch. No one saw him as the strongest anymore, because the strongest never fears. And Ryan? Now he lived in fear. A week after the encounter in the parking lot, Ryan realized he had become a shadow in his own life. He no longer cared about showing off in front of others, no longer cared about reputation, no longer cared about proving anything, because all he could do was survive, not anger anyone, not disturb anyone, not draw attention, simply stay safe. But deep inside, he knew a terrifying truth. Worse than anything, he would never feel safe again. Because now, he knew what would happen when you touch the wrong person. Jamal Moreau didn't need to beat him, didn't need to threaten him, didn't need to do anything. He just needed to let him destroy himself. And that was the most terrible punishment of all. Jamal Moreau didn't need to lift a finger. He didn't need to hit Ryan. He didn't need to threaten him. He didn't need to make a scene or start pointless fights. All he had to do was let him understand that he had made the biggest mistake of his life. Fear doesn't come from external wounds. It comes from what cannot be seen. Ryan Carter was no longer the leader of Westwood. He was just a walking corpse, a beast that once ruled the forest but was now prey to its own fear. And Jamal? He had never needed violence to win. As the days passed, Jamal's silence became a presence that dominated Ryan's life. No one spoke of it directly, but everyone in school felt the change. Once, Ryan Carter was the one people had to watch out for. When he entered a room, he took over the space, forcing everyone to acknowledge his presence in one way or another. A sarcastic pat on the back, a sharp joke, a smirk when he watched someone awkwardly bow their head. But now, everything had reversed. Now, when Jamal entered a room, no one dared to look him in the eye for too long. Not out of fear like Ryan once spread, a fear built on force and bullying, but a subtler, more dangerous fear, a fear of those who don't need to prove their power because everyone knows they have it. Jamal never spoke unless necessary, never took pleasure in Ryan's downfall. He just continued living his life, quietly, confidently, unchanged. But it was that lack of change that made everyone fear him. Jamal didn't need to put on a front to protect himself, because he no longer needed to. Ryan Carter understood this more than anyone. He no longer dared to look Jamal in the eye, no longer dared to enter the same room as him without feeling suffocated. Every time he passed Jamal in the hallway, he felt like something was choking him. A silent panic, a feeling that he was being watched even if no one was looking at him. Maybe it was just an illusion, or maybe it was the truth. Because once you fall under Jamal Moreau's control, no one escapes. Everything might have ended there, if not for what happened on a Friday afternoon. Ryan left school later than usual that day. He no longer lingered on the football field or hung out with his friends after school. He just wanted to get home as fast as possible. But as he walked out to the parking lot, a sight nearly stopped his breath. Jamal was standing there, right next to his car. He wasn't doing anything, not touching the car, not standing in an intimidating way. He was simply waiting. Ryan froze. He didn't know what to do. Should he run? But where would he go? Should he face him? But he knew he had no chance at all. He could do nothing but stand there, waiting for the next nightmare. Jamal stared at him for a long time, then slowly walked toward him. Ryan felt every second stretch out like a century. Then, when there were only a few steps left, Jamal stopped. He didn't smile, didn't look angry. He just looked him straight in the eye, a gaze that made Ryan feel smaller than he had ever felt. Then he spoke one sentence. Just one sentence. a sentence Ryan would never forget. Do you understand now? No threat, no warning, no violence, just one simple question. But it carried the weight of everything that had happened. Ryan couldn't utter a word. He didn't need to answer. Jamal knew that he understood. He had truly understood. And that was the scariest thing of all. Ryan Carter stood there, speechless. Jamal hadn't threatened him. He didn't need to raise his voice, didn't need to appear intimidating. He simply looked at him with eyes devoid of any hatred, cruelty, or anger, only an absolute calmness. But it was that calmness that was the most terrifying thing of all. Ryan understood, and Jamal knew that he had understood. That moment lasted only a few seconds, but to Ryan it felt like Jamal had etched an everlasting mark on his life. Jamal didn't need to do anything more. He had won. Ryan never returned to being the person he was before. In the days that followed, he continued to attend school, but no longer as himself. He no longer ruled the hallways, no longer controlled his friends like puppets, no longer was the person everyone feared or admired. He was just a shadow of his former self. A few students whispered about his sudden change. Some thought he was obsessed with something. Others guessed that something had happened, but no one knew for sure. And more importantly, no one dared to ask. Because there was one thing everyone knew. Jamal Moreau had done nothing at all. No violence, no direct threats, nothing that could be considered a clear action. But the result was undeniable. Ryan Carter had been defeated without a single punch being thrown. Jamal continued his life as before, without needing to change anything. He never boasted about what had happened, never acted arrogantly, nor sought to assert his power, because he didn't need to do that. Those who understood had already understood. Those with the intention to challenge him had backed off. Whispers about him only grew louder, but no one dared to confront him directly anymore. Jamal Moreau didn't need to be aggressive to make others fear him, because his silence had become the strongest weapon. True power is not in the fist. It is not in shouting to assert oneself. It is not in boasting or demanding respect. True power is when others understand on their own that they shouldn't challenge you. No need to fight, no need to prove anything. Just be there, and they will back down. Ryan Carter would never forget. He would never dare to touch Jamal again. Not because he feared getting beaten, but because he knew he couldn't fight against something he couldn't control. And absolute control always belonged to Jamal. He once thought he understood what power was. But now, he realized that true power doesn't come from domination. It comes from control. And Jamal Moreau was the one who controlled everything. Ryan Carter had once been the strongest person in school, the one no one dared to oppose. But just after one mistake, he lost everything. Not because he was defeated in a fight, but because he had challenged the wrong person. Jamal Moreau didn't need a fist to win. No need to shout, no need to prove anything. He just needed Ryan to realize that he had lost his power forever. Because true power doesn't come from threats. It comes from absolute control. What do you think about how Jamal dealt with the bully? Do you believe that silence and invisible power are stronger than violence? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you won't miss out on more exciting content. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next videos.